Anyway, today I'm going to talk about the bombardier beetle. So here's what he looks like, right? Already you can tell he's kind of a prick. He just looks like an ant that one day decided to stick a sunflower seed on his back, thinking he's all creative, like, yeah, I'm original now, I'm my own insect, got the junk in the trunk for the ladies, no big deal. That's just the picture Wikipedia shows though. There are a bunch of other species of bombardier, most of which look a little more unique, so I'll give him some credit. The cool thing about the bombardier beetle though has nothing to do with appearance. It's actually the fact that this creature has some pretty awesome weaponry up its sleeve. The beetle is actually capable of shooting a foul-smelling chemical spray from its back end. And it doesn't even have to eat Chipotle beforehand, am I right, ladies? Anyway, the spray contains, among other things, a compound called 1,4-benzoquinone, which is quite irritating to vulnerable tissue, like eyes or mouths. Couple that with the fact that the mixture comes out at a temperature close to the boiling point, and you've got a pretty gangster arthropod on your hands. One could liken the bombardier beetle to the common Tumblr feminist. Whenever it feels even slightly threatened, it starts pulling shit out of its ass in an effort to be as unnecessarily inflammatory as possible. Even more interesting than the spray itself, though, is the way the beetle pulls it off. It starts out with two different substances, hydrogen peroxide and hydroquinone, each of which is stored in a separate reservoir in the body. Then whenever the bombardier gets his jerrys in a jostle, he releases either chemical into a single chamber. Once they mix, these chemicals react violently with one another, producing a bunch of heat and gas. The pressure from the gas is what propels the liquid out of the chamber and into the face of anything nearby. Fortunately for the bombardier, the pressure also seals off the entrances to the reservoirs, so as to stop the thing from, blowing itself up. As soon as the pressure's released though, the valves reopen and the process can be repeated. And this whole cycle takes place within the course of a couple milliseconds, meaning the average beetle could fire anywhere from 5 to 20 blasts within a fraction of a second. Once this video is over, you guys should look up some slow-mo videos of the bombardier in action. I can't show you here because of copyright and all, but it's pretty cool, so go check it out. Anyway though, this system of using pressurized gases both to launch projectiles and to regulate the chambering process is actually somewhat similar to how guns like the AK-47 work, so I thought it was pretty neat how this creature managed to evolve something so mechanical in nature. I just hope the NRA doesn't catch wind of these guys. If the government takes away our chemical weapons, only the bombardier beetles will have chemical weapons. Then what, man? Then what? Hey, do you guys remember how the Flintstones always used to use animals as tools? Like that pelican cement mixer, it's all living. Well, it's a shame the writers didn't know about the bombardier beetle, because it would fit right in with their primitive shenanigans. Wilma's walking home late at night, right? Hear someone sneaking up on her, hand on her shoulder, bam! Prehistoric pepper spray. Then when he's down, she whips out the eel, bam! Prehistoric taser. He thinks it's over, little does he know, she's got a cicada on a string around her neck. Bam! Prehistoric rape whistle. Police come, take him to jail, he serves his sentence, after a while he gets granted parole, things finally looking up for him, and that's when they stick the parrot on his shoulder. Bam! Prehistoric Megan's Law. Hey, so I'm kinda new around here, and so legally I'm obligated.
He's a pervert.
Well, what he means to say is
Kitty diddler.
what? Okay, first of all, nobody got diddled, let alone
Once a rapist, always a rapist.
Anyway, what was this episode about? Right, Bombardier. Hey kids, let's talk about Fidel Castro. We're all familiar with Castro, right? Dictator of Cuba for the whole second half of the 20th century, main antagonist of the Cuban Missile Crisis, Anyway, this man loves three things. He loves Cuba, he loves communism, and good God, does the man love dairy. Yep, you heard me right. The all-powerful dictator of communist Cuba is obsessed with anything related to milk and its derivatives. I drew up a little chart here, right? I call it the Leche Lovin' Ladder. At the bottom you got dairy farmers, then you got Ross O'Donovan, then Mr. Bones, then starving babies, and then all the way up at the top here, you got Fidel Castro. Today, I'm going to share a few true stories that illustrate his preoccupation. Okay, the first one isn't really a story so much as a fact, but according to several sources, Castro was known to be able to eat 18 scoops of ice cream after a meal. That's more than 2 pints. If that doesn't impress you, then go try it for yourself. Me, I can barely manage a pint and a half on an empty stomach, and Castro's doing it on top of a full meal. But it gets better. Being such an ice cream connoisseur, Castro ordered the construction of an ice cream shop. But this isn't your average everyday parlor, not by a long shot. He built a straight up ice cream complex taking up an entire city block. This was a piece of modern architecture too, in total contrast to the surrounding slums, all for the sake of ice cream. The place is called Coppelia, and it's still open today. Of course, Castro's obsession went beyond just personal pleasure. Dairy was so dear to him that it often found its way into diplomatic interactions. Like one time, a French diplomat came to visit, so Castro whips out some Cuban cheese. Specifically though, it was camembert cheese, a variety that France is famous for. French guy was like, hey, not bad, it's almost as good as the French kind. Try it again. I think you'll find it's even better than the French. Alright, I wouldn't say that. I'm sorry, are you disrespecting my cheese? In my house? On my island? No, I mean it's good, I just said the French kind is better. Maybe if you froggy fucks bathed once in a while, you'd be able to taste the cheese instead of your own B.O. Listen, you've got your cigars, we've got our cheese, live with it. Fine. Fuck him, it's good cheese. I'm paraphrasing just a little bit, but that's basically how it went down. So already it's obvious that dairy is of great value to Castro. Most exceptional, however, is how this value reflected in his leadership. Naturally, having an entire nation at his disposal, Castro wanted to bolster the Cuban dairy industry as much as possible. But there was one problem. Cuba initially had two types of cows called La Reinas and Zebus. La Reinas came from the days when Spain ruled Cuba, and Zebus originated from India. Both of these cows are well suited to the Cuban environment, having a very high tolerance for heat. However, they don't produce much milk, they're mostly just raised for their meat. So Castro decides to import thousands of Holsteins from Canada. Holsteins are the classic black and white cows, and as we all know, you can juice these guys for days. They are utterly superior. Only problem is, they're used to living in Canada, so when they're plopped down under the scorching Caribbean sun, it's going to stress them out. They're not going to be laughing cows by any means. So as a result, Castro's imports still didn't put out enough milk to satisfy his desires. At this point, your average run-of-the-mill dairy queen would have given up. But Castro, he's more than that. He's a dairy dictator. So he ordered the construction of a giant air-conditioned complex with the sole purpose of providing a comfortable environment for his Holsteins. And it helped a little bit, but they were still stressed out. They still weren't putting out at their natural levels. And as you can imagine, climate controlling an entire facility is very expensive, so Castro was forced to abandon the project. But like the astronaut he is, Castro held on to his dream of finding the Milky Way. So he gathered a team of scientists and farmers and ordered them to breed together the Zebus and the Holsteins in order to produce a heat-resistant, lactose-pumping super cow. The breeding efforts were mostly a bust, never producing the bovine master race that Castro longed for. However, there was one exception. Under Castro's program, a single individual was born that met his expectations with flying colors. The cow was named Ubre Blanca, Spanish for white udder, and she produced world record-breaking volumes of milk, peaking at 110 liters a day. That's more than 29 entire gallons of lactation. Needless to say, Castro was absolutely euphoric at this isolated success of his. To say he went ballistic would be an understatement. He went intercontinentally ballistic. Like, India hasn't got shit on the levels of cow worship that Castro performed. Daily updates were published in the Cuban national newspaper describing Ubre Blanca's health and productivity. And when she died in 1985, Castro commissioned a giant marble statue of the cow in her honor. He also had scientists harvest tissue and egg samples for the sake of preserving her DNA. After Ubre Blanca's death, Castro's plans for the Cuban dairy industry got even more desperate and ridiculous somehow. This is based off of an actual conversation that he had with his team of scientists in 1987. Okay guys, hear me out. What if we make cows that are the size of dogs, so that way they can live in people's apartments with them? Fidel, I don't think that's gonna work. No, it'll work. You just have to grow grass in the apartment too. You can't be serious. Yeah, you just gotta put up some fluorescent lights. Bam, little grazing patch for your doggy cow. You are a fucking lunatic. And obviously nothing ever came of that idea, and Cuba's dairy industry is still floundering today, sadly. So yeah, if you haven't gotten the picture by now, the dude likes milk. Imagine he's at the birth of his grandson, right? Ah, what a beautiful baby boy. Fidel, there's something we need to tell you. Your grandson, he's lactose intolerant. Prepare the firing squad. Anyway, there's plenty of other miscellaneous stories surrounding his little preoccupation, like the time the CIA tried to poison his milkshake, so I just decided to highlight a few big ones. Hey kids, when living things evolve, it's almost always for the better. After all, the reason genes get passed down is because of the fact that they help the organism survive. Occasionally, though, adaptations that might help an animal in general can become huge drawbacks in other ways. Today, we're going to talk about some inherited traits that can end up screwing certain animals over if they're not careful. First is sloths. So, evolutionarily, life has found two distinct methods to handling survival on land. You got the plants and the fungi who just kind of hang out, and then you got the animals who actually, do things. The sloth is the one member of the animal kingdom who was brave enough to say, alright, I made the wrong choice here. This whole mobility thing, way overrated. So you know what? Fuck it. I'm changing teams. The sloth's sedentary lifestyle is made possible by the fact that the creature has the metabolism of the average college kid, sleeping 16 hours a day and only crapping like once a week. However, while this lifestyle is easily sustained on a diet of Hot Pockets and alcohol, it doesn't work as well when you eat nothing but leaves, which provide very little energy relative to volume. Because of this, you can have sloths who straight up kick the bucket just from being too full. Their sad, slow sloth stomachs spend so much energy over so much time trying to digest the matter, that by the time they're able to start absorbing energy, they've already fallen out of the tree dead from exhaustion. I learned about this next thing from my Uncle Harvey back when I was 8. He said to me, "Hey Sammy, did you know sharks die if they stop swimming?" At first I was skeptical, because this was the same man that told me that the squirrel on the road was just taking a nap. Several firm prods with a stick proved to me otherwise, so by this point in time, I figured Uncle Harvey just had a generally poor grasp on the concept of death. Apparently though, he was right about the first thing. Some species of sharks, such as great whites and whale sharks, need to constantly move forward in order to push new water into their mouths and through their gills so that they don't suffocate. It's kinda like when you were a kid and you had to keep running to keep the kite in the air, only instead of a kite, it's your respiratory system, and instead of the kite falling down, you would choke to death on your own deflated organs. Anyway, this method of breathing is known as ram ventilation. Following this logic, one would think that rams would then breathe through something called shark ventilation, but no, apparently they just breathe like everybody else. Next we have ferrets. So in some cultures, ferrets are referred to as polecats, and there are two main theories as to why that is. Some biologists believe that the name is based on the fact that ferrets are an evolutionary hybrid of the pole and the cat, as evidenced by their shape and features. However, others believe that the name is actually an outdated piece of Nazi propaganda, designed to show that Polish people are so dumb they don't know what a cat looks like. Nah, I'm just fucking with you guys. They're actually called polecats because of the old French word pole, meaning chicken, which comes from the fact that these guys would always break into farmers' hen houses back in the day. Back to the matter at hand though, there is one critical difference between ferrets and cats. When a cat eats some weird household item, it can always just vomit or crap it out, problem solved. However, things get a little more complicated when your intestines are the size of shoelaces and your body is shaped like a sideways question mark. In fact, ferrets are probably the easiest to clog animals in the world. They can get blocked up and potentially die just from a few of its own hairs or a cherry pit or something getting lodged in their intestines. And it takes more than just a pipe cleaner to fix that kind of issue. Most ferret parrots have to take their pet to the hospital in the event of a blockage, in order to have the obstruction removed through surgery. So unless you want to pay thousands of dollars in vet bills, make sure to keep an eye on your ferret so it doesn't end up killing itself on something random.
How it feels to chew 5-gum.
Help! I can't shit no more!
5-gum. Stimulate your ferrets.
Whenever I browse this site, I see more and more videos of people talking about things like YouTuber drama, the election, world politics, and it made me think, hey, maybe I should start covering more relevant, nuanced topics in my videos. Anyway, let's talk about chickens. So the story of the chicken begins a long time ago in Southeast Asia. Now, this area had a ton of bamboo growing all over the place. And the thing about bamboo is it follows a very specific life cycle, where once every 50 years or so, every bamboo plant in a given region will blossom at the exact same time. Then, shortly after, they litter the whole area with these little seeds known as bamboo rice, or as I call them, bambinos. These pellets get planted, the current bamboo dies out, and the cycle starts over. Now, enter the ancestor of the domesticated chicken, known as the red jungle fowl. The jungle fowl lived in the same area as the bamboo, and, as you can imagine, they got a lot of benefit out of being literally knee-deep in food once every half-century. So much so that evolution basically said, alright, when food supplies go up, I want you to just start pumping out babies like there's no tomorrow. That way, we can take as much advantage of each bloom as possible. As a result, the chicken population became synchronized with the bamboo, shooting up during blooms and dwindling in between. Then humans showed up and they saw this pattern, and they said, wow, how bamboozling. And then they realized, wait a minute, that pun was dumb. But also, we can harness this whole chicken cycle thing. All we have to do is give these guys a whole bunch of food, and we can make their reproductive systems go into overdrive whenever we want. Do you know what that means? Lots of hot bird porn. No, it means we get as many eggs as we could ever dream of. So, with a bit of work, we managed to domesticate the chicken around 5000 BC. And as you can imagine, the idea of having a literal egg-laying machine around the house was extremely popular, leading to the chicken spreading across the entirety of the civilized world over the course of a few millennia. I think it's interesting that, despite the fact that the West has had chickens for most of its history, it wasn't until way later that we figured out where they came from. Like, alright men, it's time to delve into the world of the unknown. We're gonna see things the likes of which man has never laid eyes upon before. But, if you keep your wits about you, we just might make it out of here alive. Hey, is this yours? No? Weird. What the hell? Of course, having a constantly supercharged uterus is not without its drawbacks. After all, the chicken essentially goes through its entire menstrual cycle every day. So next time your girlfriend's complaining about how bad her period is, get her a box of chocolates and be generally attentive to her needs. You prick. Anyway, one thing with chickens and most other egg-laying critters is that they only have one hole in their pelvic region, which is called a cloaca, I think. Or cloaca. Cloaca? So the Croatia basically acts like a funnel, taking all the eggs and waste and sending it down the same chute. And while this might sound convenient at first, there is one fatal disadvantage that affects chickens in particular. Sometimes the egg can get stuck on its way out, leading to a condition known as egg binding. And since this means nothing can exit the clamato anymore, the egg-bound chicken ends up dying of constipation over the course of a couple days. Hey Jerry, how you doing? Not good, Sean. Not good. Oh man, what's wrong? It's just, ever since Jenny got egg-bound, things have been so stressful. Her funeral expenses are through the roof, and her memory means so much to me, but if the bills keep coming in like this, I'm not sure my family will be able to handle it. Well, hey man, you know what they say, don't put all your eggs in one casket. Let's just hope she doesn't get egg-zoomed. I'm sorry. Don't ever contact me or my kids ever again. I understand. Do you ever feel like life has passed you by? Does the daily grind leave you feeling trapped in your own life like an animal in a cage? Well, that doesn't mean you can't enjoy some fun facts about livestock while you're at it. Today, I'll be giving a tour of the life, death, and processing of the American beef cattle. Disclaimer, this video is only a basic summary of some common industry practices. No two farms are alike, some are nicer, some are worse. I'm not a shill, please don't get mad at me. Now, in the beginning, there was nothing. And then God said, "Let there be light!" And it was good. Henceforth, you shall be called Craig. At birth, the calf weighs somewhere between 60 and 100 pounds. The males are typically castrated within the first couple of weeks, usually without anesthetic. The main point of this is to keep the steers mellow later in life, but it also stops their male hormones from giving the meat an off taste that the American palate isn't really accustomed to. Anyway, things started off pretty good for Craig. Drinking milk, hanging out, the life. After a while he figures out you can eat the floor, that's cool. But then after about 10 months he gets loaded into the cattle cars. If you're a history buff like me, you know that's not a good sign. Little does Craig know, he's been auctioned off to a feedlot 1,000 miles away. Here the cattle are packed together like sardines, if sardines were 500-pound terrestrial mammals. The menu consists of random roughage and energy-dense feed like corn so they can pack on the pounds more quickly. Overall, this environment puts a good deal of stress on the beast, which can end up taking a toll on his health. But it's nothing a little visit from the antibiotics fairy can't fix. Once fully grown, Craig gets taken to the packing plant. This is where the magic happens, and by magic we mean mechanically automated goring into commodities. This is where things get messy, so try to forget that we gave this random animal a name a minute ago. In order to keep things as humane as possible, a worker will first use this device, referred to as a stunner. Here's a demonstration. This renders the beast instantly unconscious, or worse, but potato at this point. Its ankle is then attached to a conveyor rail, which will gently guide the animal along the rest of its journey. First, the cow gets to talk to this man. He's called the sticker. Can you guess what he does? If you said that he gouges out throats for a living, you'd be correct. Over the course of about a minute, the flow goes from torrential downpour to incontinent poodle, by which point our beloved bovine can continue on his way. At the next station, the cow is subjected to high voltage electrical stimulation. Hopefully the nervous system is all out of steam by this point, but if not, the boys on the killing floor will have a great story to tell their wives. Haha, just kidding. The FDA estimates that 93% of meat worker marriages are in shambles. Who knew that 11 hours of pure slaughter every day could desensitize a man? Anyway, electrical stimulation basically works to speed up the onset of rigor mortis. Getting this process out of the way means the meat won't toughen up once it reaches the freezer. Next, the carcass undergoes a thorough power washing. Like the noble mortician, this hose works to make a lifetime of filth disappear. Unfortunately, though beauty is only skin deep, manure runs to the core, so the cow must be disemboweled to prevent contamination later on. And we might as well get rid of all these other gross bits while we're at it. Then the feds stick their nose in things to make sure everything is as it should be. Yup, it's a cow. Finally, we send it down the line, evacuate the spine, bifurcate the hind, reticulate the spline, and power wash it again just for good measure. This whole process from bashing to slashing to splashing takes a mere 15 minutes to complete. That means it takes the same amount of time to process 3 half-ton mammals and 1 scheduled license renewal. Try puzzling that one out. After hanging out in the cooler for a couple days, the beef is broken down into its many cuts: chuck, loin, sirloin, what have you. This is the good stuff that'll get shipped off as is to barbecues, bar mitzvahs, and bargain bins all across the country. Then you got all these misfit bits hanging out wherever else. Still technically flesh, so we have machines pluck it off, pulp it, and use it to make hamburgers, hot dogs, and the like. Then all the garbage even Americans can't stomach is sent off to the rendering plant to be made into whatever else. So there you have it. I don't really have an outro except, kinda gross, right? I was inspired to make this video while doing research on the ancient medicine man, Galen. Apparently, he would often do experiments on animals in order to learn more about the body, his favorite of which was the Barbary ape, due to its anatomical similarity to humans. Now when I say experiments, I don't mean push a button, get a peanut type things. I'm talking like Josef Mengele meets the plague dogs. He'd clamp their pee tubes shut just to watch their kidneys swell, cut their spinal cords in different places to see what went limp and what didn't, and squeeze their brains and make them go unconscious, to name a few. My initial reaction was, hey, that's neat. But then, after some thought, I was like, whoa, hold the phone. In 200 AD, you couldn't get a doorknob even. Yet, if you had the right resources, you could order a goddamn monkey. Many monkeys, in fact. By the barrelful, presumably. Alternatively, if you were born in the right place, you could be the monkey poacher, making a living wrestling up some primates with nothing more than a net, a pokey thing, a hole in the ground, and a whole lot of ambition. So I got to thinking, what other kind of animals did ancient Rome have access to? Apparently basically everything that lived in this part of the map. They were particularly fond of elephants, and it's easy to see why. Sure, elephants aren't that big of a deal to the average person today, right? You've been seeing pictures of them since you were 2, big whoop. But imagine if you were a 20-year-old man who had never seen an elephant in your life. The closest thing you've ever witnessed is like horses, maybe some deer now and then. You get drafted, you go out to battle, you're a little scared, but you've been trained well, you're ready. Then, over the horizon, you see 20 house-sized behemoths with giant tentacles sticking out of their faces, horns longer than your body sticking out of their mouths, all screaming their weird trumpety scream, making your whole body vibrate like Mars himself is shitting on your very existence. So naturally, Rome loved to show these things off all the time, just as a display of power. Like, imagine if you were going to a speech in DC, and Trump rolls up with a pack of dragons. You'd listen to every word he said. He's got fucking dragons. That's what it was like seeing the emperor parade around with elephants back in the day. Of course, that wasn't the only use they had for imported animals. When they weren't being shown off in menageries, many of the exotic beasts brought to Rome were used in shows called venatios, which were basically like modern day bullfights, only instead of bulls, you had whatever crazy critters the state could find. Lions, crocodiles, gazelles, whatever. Around 55 BC, Roman statesman Pompey the Great decided to organize one such event, the feature creature of which was, you guessed it, an elephant. Unfortunately, Pompey forgot a crucial Barnum and Bailey trade secret. See, you're supposed to break the elephant's spirit before the show, not during. So the boys get to poking and the thing starts freaking out, just screaming and crying, even gesturing towards the audience like it was begging for mercy. Now the crowd at this kind of event was mainly composed of dirty, bloodthirsty peasants, and even they were like, holy shit, this is messed up. I came here for a nice, family-friendly disemboweling or two, but this, just deplorable. Then they all start crying and the whole thing just ends up being a huge mess. Anyway, these types of spectacles became larger and larger as time went on. It's said that Emperor Trajan once held a venatio lasting 120 days, during which some 11,000 animals were killed. They also got pretty elaborate. A lot of creativity went into keeping things fresh for the crowd. In 203 AD, they had a model of a crashed ship built inside the arena, and an assortment of 400 animals were set loose from the wreckage and then killed. That's what we should do for the next Super Bowl halftime show, honestly. Just pack every team's mascot into a decommissioned submarine. Then, when they all run out, we have the troops gun them down while the national anthem plays in the background. Anyway, the ingenuity of the people organizing these events really knew no bounds. One time they tied together a bear and a bull just to see what they'd do. Unfortunately, all that happened was the stock market crashed. Also, fun fact, one Emperor Commodus is credited with the invention of a unique crescent-shaped arrow designed specifically to decapitate ostriches and watch them run around headless for a while. Seriously, they did that so often that they needed a device to make the job easier. Sometimes, just to shake things up, they'd have the animals kill the people, which was known as damnatio ad bestias. This form of execution was typically carried out using lions, but other beasts were used as well, including dogs, bears, and at one point even an eagle, although the guy was crucified first, so it wasn't much of a fight. So, moral of the story, if you ever end up in ancient Rome and you want to see some animals, you'll still have access to almost all the same creatures we see in zoos today, and the only catch is that something has to die at the end. Animal test subjects have always been an important facet of science, since they allow us to study physiology in more destructive ways than we could get away with on humans. So it should come as no surprise that, over the years, there's been a lot of creatures haphazardly thrown at the cosmos against their will. Here's a bunch of smelly animals that achieved more in their short lives than you ever will. Quick disclaimer, this is by no means a comprehensive list, not even close. We'd be here all day if it was. More so just a highlight reel of the ones I found the most interesting. So the Great Zoo in the Sky was first founded in 1947 when the US launched a craft containing a bunch of fruit flies 68 miles into the air in order to see what kind of horrible mutants would get made from all the cosmic radiation up there. Unfortunately, they were totally fine, so the Earth was like, hey, living things can go into space and not die instantly, supple. And the next year they decided to send up a rhesus macaque named Albert, which it seems kind of like jumping the gun to go from barely alive specks to basically a person in one step. If it were me, I would have thrown like a frog or a gerbil in between there, but whatever, I'm no cosmopolitan. Anyway, Albert died of suffocation on the way up and never really made it to space alive. Fun fact, this rocket was actually a V-2 missile stolen from the Germans after World War II. So just in case any of you have any sympathy for those Nazi characters, they're technically responsible for the death of a poor innocent space monkey. Pretty condemning if you ask me. But I guess the US felt pretty bad about it, so they decided to deal with their grief by naming the next monkey Albert 2. Pretty unhealthy coping mechanism according to my shrink, but she also thinks Punk is dead, so what does she know? This Albert actually made it into space alive through a grand effort incorporating all the incredible cutting-edge technology that the atomic era had to offer. And after all that, they goofed on the parachute, so Albert 2 turned into a fine red mist on impact, which just goes to prove the age-old adage, you can lead a monkey to space, but you can't make him land. There were a few more Alberts after this. Albert 3 fucking exploded. Albert 4 made it up, but he had another tissue paper parachute what don't work for heck, so he's out. Albert 5, yet again, bad chute, liquefied on impact, until finally, in 1951, on Albert number 6, they figured out how to make a big blanket that consistently makes you not immediately die when you fall from the sky, and the monkey was recovered alive from the capsule, alongside his 11 mouse roommates. Of course, he died 2 hours later, but hey, still counts. Earlier that same year, Russia launched 2 little pupniks named Tsigan and Dzik, both of whom came back unharmed. These 2 were the first vertebrates to ever leave Earth and come back alive. Then in 57, the Reds snagged another achievement by putting the first living thing into orbit, besides the bacteria clinging to Sputnik 1, but they're losers, we don't talk about them. Specifically, they launched one brave and daring dog from the streets of Moscow, probably the most famous animal to ever go into space. You know its name well. That dog is, of course, Airbud. Unlike those other guys we talked about, Laika was never planned to be recovered intact, since we barely knew how to put something into orbit by this time, let alone bring it back. But they still wanted to make sure she stayed alive long enough to at least reach space. So before the mission, they put her through the most rigorous canine space camp that Russia had to offer, throwing her in a centrifuge for a while to get her used to G-force, making her cage progressively smaller to get her used to cramped spaces, which made her just not shit anymore at all, but that's a different story. They also switched her diet to a special high nutrition gel that she would have eaten after takeoff, you know, had her brain not crapped out from overheating within the first few hours. In 59, the US strapped 2 monkeys to the nose cone of a Jupiter missile and actually got them back alive afterwards, which is crazy mostly because these things withstood 38 Gs of acceleration. For context, that's the force that makes even trained pilots lose consciousness times 4, or this thing times 12, or roughly the same forced experience when you realize that's not a normal speed bump, but one of those evil tiny ones that ruin your life, you know the ones. Well, that's what you get for doing 25 near a hospital, Sam. Well, hey, good thing I'm already here considering the ballistics test that just went down between the roof of my car and my frickin' skull. Jesus. So in 61, we graduated from monkeys to great apes, sending up a chimpanzee named Ham. Remember Space Chimps? Yeah, it was that. Frame for frame, Andy Samberg and all. What's special about Ham is that he was actually trained to pull levers and slap buttons while up in the ship, being rewarded banana pellets for completing tasks and getting his feet tased whenever he messed up. Sounds like a cartoon, I know, but I promise it's for real. Meanwhile, the Soviets were busy putting a big, bald, smart ape into orbit, no big deal. France saw the US and Russia sending up monkeys and dogs and felt left out, so in 63, they launched a cat into space and were like, yeah, that's cool and unique. I'm one of the popular kids now. In 68, the Soviets Soviets saw the rabbit making rice cakes on the moon and said, how about a tortoise for that hare, launching 2 of them into deep space, all the way around the moon and back to Earth, where they were recovered alive after their capsule landed in the ocean. Kinda cheating when you are your own crash suit, but an impressive feat regardless. In 73, we put mummy chogs in space. What's a mummy chog? It's one of these things. Like a fish, but real rough and tumble. Tolerates low oxygen, weird pressure, high salinity, dishwasher safe, Energy Star rated, you name it, sister. At first they could only swim in circles, but after a couple weeks they actually adapted to zero G and figured out how to maneuver properly. Even more interesting, we also brought mummy chog eggs, and when these hatched, the little mummy choglets knew how to swim in zero G immediately. Kinda spooky, honestly. That same mission also sent up some spiders who managed to spin some webs. Trash webs, mind you, but hey, they managed. In 78, The Muppet Show aired Pigs in Space for the first time. In 85, we cut off the arms of a bunch of newts and sent them up to see if they grow back the same way. The reasoning behind this being, if a newt can't grow stuff back, then an astronaut with a paper cut probably can't either. Fortunately, they rearmed themselves at the normal rate, so all's good on that front. Around the same time, NASA actually had talks with Sesame Street about sending Big Bird up on the space shuttle as a publicity stunt. This is real. The plan ultimately fell through after they realized Big Bird is fucking giant and unwieldy at all times, literally the worst possible choice for a celebrity cameo on a space shuttle. So instead they sent a school teacher in his place. And then the Challenger fucking exploded. Let me reiterate. There is a timeline not too far from this one where Big Bird is a casualty in the single worst astronautical disaster in history. A tiny evil part of me almost wishes that happened, like that's just so indescribably absurd. In the early 90s, we sent up some baby jellyfish to grow up in space just for laughs. They figured out how to maneuver just fine, but when we brought them back down, they literally didn't have a concept of gravity and couldn't orient themselves properly in their new environment. Which, being a jellyfish is the easiest thing there is. You just kinda exist, maybe squirm a little now and then. So when you manage to somehow mess that up, you know things have gone seriously wrong. In 2003, the US sent up a bunch of invertebrates, including silkworms, spiders, carpenter bees, and harvester ants. Whoops, they exploded. In 07, some tardigrades went up, totally exposed to the vacuum of space for 10 days, which, surprise, surprise, they were fine. On that same mission, a cockroach gave birth, creating the first organism that we know of to ever have been conceived outside of Earth. And finally, in 2018, Elon Musk sent a big basket of mice to the International Space Station. Just, you know, 'cause he can. So those are just a handful of God's creatures who got to experience the majesty of not knowing up from down. If you're like me, you're probably a little jealous. Why does an ugly ape get to go into space, but I don't? I wish to bear witness to the music of the spheres firsthand, in a way that a lower creature could never appreciate. You know why you feel like that? Because you're a nerd. As we all know, the evolution of species is an incredible process, driven by little more than the random chance that certain mutations may happen to provide a practical advantage in a creature's environment. And as a result, there's a lot of things out there that look super dumb once you strip back a few layers. Here's the top 10 worst animal skeletons of all time. So first and foremost, I'd like to settle a little debate I've been seeing floating around the past few weeks. Yes, penguins do, in fact, have knees. But in order to hide full-grown legs into one plump cylinder, you gotta have a little skeletal trickery on your side. You guys ever do wall sits in gym class or elsewhere? One of the most torturous exercises out there. I now feel even worse for penguins, because not only did they have to deal with living in a frigid black and white hellscape, the most hostile environment known to man second only to the vacuum of space, all the while constantly pursued by ravenous bloodthirsty sea dogs, but they're also secretly doing wall sits their entire life. Quick side note, in Mandarin, the word for penguin consists of the characters for business goose, which is fucking hilarious. Like one day a goose put on a suit and said, "Today it is time to make a name for myself, honk." This next guy is known as Parsons chameleon, found in the more remote regions of Madagascar. Notice the fleshy protuberances around its nose area. Turns out, not fleshy, not even remotely fleshy, not even one flesh. Instead, it just has a skull forever frozen in time in the middle of exploding, like it sneezed right in the middle of God shaping it out of clay, and he was just like, whatever, it's a feature now. So for that, this rough-headed reptilian gets number 9. Normally I would have ranked it higher, but that's a dope tale, so he gets some pity points. Next is the pufferfish. So for most of my life, I've pictured pufferfish as just not having any bones. I know it doesn't really make sense, but neither does them turning into a balloon like a goddamn cartoon. Turns out, in their normal state, they actually look like this, and when they inflate, those concentric rings of spines slide outwards past one another to cover the full area, like the aperture aperture of a camera lens expanding to cover the full frame of the fish. The sheer ingenuity of this design has shattered my childhood dream of real-life balloon animals, which has earned the pufferfish the number 8 spot on this list. Now, if you've gotten around to certain zoological circles, you've been shown this skull and been told, ah yes, that comes from the dwarf elephant. Oh, you've never seen one? That's because they're extinct. And that thing in the middle? Ah yes, nothing more than the nose hole to which the trunk connects. However, if you're a rational, free-thinking adult like me, you can look past the lies spoon-fed to you by Nat Geo and other liberal media outlets and see this for what it is. A cyclops. Next is the orca, otherwise known as the killer whale, the panda torpedo, or the SeaWorld slave. Its skeleton is fairly normal at first glance, but check out this little thing under here. That little bony blip is actually all that remains of the legs and pelvis of the orca from when it evolved from land mammals. Personally, I think that's highly disrespectful to their ancestors. Like, they could have taken the seal route and used those legs for good in the water, but instead these sea cowards said, no thanks, we're gonna undo all that evolution and just be bigger, smarter, warmer fish again. But hey, we'll keep this little piece of nothing just to remember you guys by. Truthfully, I could have chosen almost any cetacean to pick on for this, but the orca's face also reminds me of SCP-682, which is the most OP overrated shit out there, so he gets the number 6 spot. Moving on, now bear with me here. In every other mammal on Earth, the canine teeth point downward from the gum to the mouth. You know, like a tooth. But this guy, known as the Babirusa, said huh, and decided to have them grow up through the entirety of its fucking snoot and out the other end, which is the most nonsensical thing I've ever seen. Like, toenails out the front? How cliche. Let's make them go through the whole foot instead. Look, now I can kick good behind me. That's not all though. These tusks also keep growing for the creature's entire life, which isn't a problem in and of itself, right? Rodents, they keep chewing stuff to wear them down. Alligators, they just let them fall out now and then. But the Babirusa's like, pfft, I'll just nut in a lady pig long before this becomes an issue. So if it lives long enough, the teeth can curve right on around and slowly bore into the thing's face, like built-in Chinese bamboo torture. And occasionally, they can end up actually piercing the skull and shish kebabbing the brain. Now some people might say that this doesn't belong on this list, given that teeth aren't technically bones. And to those people, kids, we say, eat shit and die. Next we have the octopus. The octopus skeleton is so bad that it doesn't even exist. Sure, they got this little thing in the middle, but that doesn't count, that's just chitin. And yeah, they can get in a jar or whatever, but at what cost? At the animal picnics, the crowd shouts, bleh, shun the spineless freak. And at the animal wheelbarrow races, with nothing to grab hold of, the cephalopod holds a solitary vigil at the starting line. And lo, the octopus wins naught but a participant medal at the Grand Prix, and the number 4 spot on this list. Moving on, here's the skeleton of a fruit bat. Now, not a big deal to us regular folk, but imagine if humans had no context of bats and they dug this thing up. Like, class, archaeologists have recently found these fossilized remains, and using modern technology, we can see exactly what it would have looked like back when it was alive. This abominable creature is known only to scientists as Finger Boy, and is theorized to have fed upon fruit, insects, and the dreams of orphans, which it would siphon out from the ears of the errant little waifs whilst they slumbered. By the way, if you Google image bat skeleton, like, more than half of them have the ears built in, just like, I feel the extraordinarily bat-like wings and figure of our decoration are much too subtle for our consumers. Better slap these on. At number 2, we have the anteater. From its oboe-like skull to its gorilla fist and hands, one can only wonder who let this creature exist. Fun fact, if you take the anteater's skull and blow into its nose, it plays a beautiful song recounting the animal's entire life, and then security escorts you out of the museum. Looking at this, I can only pose the question asked for generations long before my own. That being, why the long face? Before we get to the number 1 spot, here's a few honorable mentions. The wolf eel. The ostrich. This human-cat hybrid I found on a tabloid site. And of course, the mermaid. So at our number 1 spot, we have this creature. That's supposed to be a mirror. I know most of you can't see yourself in it on account of your filthy Dorito smeared screen, so just take my word for it. So what's wrong with humans, you ask? Well, a lot of things, but for now let's stick to the skeleton. First off, these bones right here, these are known as the metatarsals. All part of the foot, right? No, that's a bunch of primate propaganda. In most other groups of land mammals, what we'd consider our ankles is actually the quote-unquote knee of the animal. Thanks a lot, walking upright. Also, it's estimated that around 80% of people will experience chronic back pain at some point in their life. Thanks a lot, walking upright. Lastly, probably something you've heard about at some point, our skull to pelvis ratio. For most animals, giving birth, not a big deal. Small heads, wide hips, mazel tov. But check out the big brain on Brett. Throws a real monkey wrench in the works there. For a while it led to some problems till those extra brains figured out how to work around it, so I guess you win this round, humans. But that doesn't stop you from also winning the #1 spot on the worst skeletons of all time. So we all know that, as far as living things go, humans win, not even a contest. But it turns out if you hop to the next genome over and look real carefully, you can actually see a basic version of a lot of the stuff that makes us so great. Here's some stories about what chimpanzees can get down to in the right context. Talking about chimp tails. Now, North Korea's Pyongyang Central Zoo has a colorful history, from its humble beginnings as literally just 50 badgers in a fence, to the parrot they taught to recite poetry praising Kim Il-sung, to being the only place in Pyongyang where you can look at a dog legally. It seems the only thing that's remained constant throughout this zoo's life is that it's fucking depressing. Fortunately, both workers and animals alike found ways to cope, one of which is smoking. Azalea the chimp is currently 13 years old and is one of the shining stars of Pyongyang Zoo, purely for her ability to burn through over a pack a day. Now I like a good old-fashioned smoking chimp as much as the next guy, but whereas most zookeepers would probably try to talk her out of something so unhealthy, the North Korean ones actually gave her supplies, just like, feeling trapped, welcome to the club, pal. Her skills are actually pretty impressive. Not only can she use a later, but in a pinch, she also knows that old schoolyard trick of lighting one ciggy with the other. Just a shame that her mind wasn't put towards something a little more healthy or productive. Nah, you know what? That's pretty dope, actually. I'm happy with that. Flashback to 1954. A chimp named Congo was born in the London Zoo. Little did anybody know, this ape was a prodigy. Out of curiosity, one of his zookeepers, named Desmond Morris, decided to give Congo a pencil and a piece of cardboard to see what he'd do. Almost immediately, he started drawing some rudimentary lines and shapes. Morris was like, whoa, and decided to let him try painting on for size. And what he saw was incredible. Congo created these beautiful renderings with a blend of realism and self-expression that would make even the great masters stare in awe. Nah, just fucking with you, they're garbage. But for a non-human, there's still something to be appreciated here. Congo had at least a very basic sense of composition. Like, you can see there's some balance to the images. Matter of fact, when his handler would make shapes on one side of the page, Congo would deliberately mark up the other side to maintain some kind of symmetry. He also had an artist's sense of self-entitlement, because whenever his owner tried to take away a picture before Congo thought it was finished, he'd literally go apeshit, all throwing a fit and screaming till they gave it back. But hey, painting done by a chimp. You know who likes pointless novelties like that? The incredibly rich. In 2005, 3 of Congo's paintings were up for auction next to works by 2 obscure little artists known as Andy Warhol and Pierre-Auguste Renoir. And while the 2 actual artist pieces went completely unsold, these 3 beauties got picked up for the scant price of over $25,000 US. And the guy was like, wow, I felt something for a second there. I really like the watermark on this, by the way. Like, this is my painting done by a chimp. Anyway, next we have this beast called Washoe. Washoe was the first non-human creature to learn to communicate through sign language. That's right, eat shit, Coco. Prior experiments in chimp communication had attempted to teach him some basic spoken language, but after realizing that chimps are physically incapable of making most of the noises we do, they decided signing would be the better option. Washoe was raised in an environment similar to what a human child would experience, complete with toys, clothes, chores, and even being allowed to sit at the dinner table, in spite of what the Bible clearly says about that. The scientists raising Washoe made sure to only communicate in American Sign Language around her, in the hopes of establishing a true conversational rapport. Initially, they took a traditional Pavlovian approach by rewarding proper use of a new sign with food and tickles. But there were a couple problems with this. Firstly, the simple action reward setup meant that Washoe didn't have to really understand the words she was signing, the same way a parrot saying I love you in a YouTube video always does it with those cold, unfeeling eyes. Secondly, Washoe would break into a laughing fit whenever they tickled her, to the point where the lesson would be essentially over. So the researchers abandoned this and instead just let her learn through observation of her caretaker signing, with much better results even in the total absence of reward stimuli. And the only downside was that the job title of designated chimp tickler ceased to exist. In total, Washoe learned around 350 individual signs in ASL, and she'd even use these to formulate novel phrases for new objects. Like one time she wanted to talk about a thermos, but didn't know what a thermos was. She goes, metal cup of drink. Hey, scat! A similar story comes from a chimp named Lucy, who was raised by one Dr. Maurice Temerlin and his wife, Jane. The tale of Lucy's life is why this woman is now officially the 3rd most famous woman named Jane who worked with apes. In the same vein as Washoe, the pair attempted to gain some insight into Lucy's weird chimp noggin by raising her like you would a human. You know, dressing herself, using silverware, making tea, looking at magazines, pretending she knows what a word is, all that jazz. But as Lucy matured, things took an ugly turn. For one, since she was brought up in a basically human environment, she eventually discovered the time-tested human pastime of alcohol. The pair would leave bottles of gin around their home with Lucy, which, I don't know how you'd make this mistake twice, but it was apparently a common occurrence for them to leave her alone for too long and come back like, honey, I think the monkey's fucking wasted. Again. Another one of her hobbies was sculpting crude human heads out of poop. Her own poop, to be clear. They also left some copies of Playgirl magazine around for Lucy to flip through, which she became very fond of. So fond, in fact, that she was caught multiple times, having relations with the vacuum cleaner. I don't understand the mechanics of it, cause no source I found ever went into detail, and believe me, I wanted to know as much as you do. All I know is that, all things considered, some pretty exemplary tool use there. So the pair saw this and they were like, alright, we gotta get this chimp laid, and fast. But the problem was, Lucy was conversing with people, eating with people, flicking the old chimp bean to people, so it's not a stretch to think that Lucy thought she was people. So imagine you're people, and you get thrown into an enclosure with a full-grown, horny male chimp. You'd have a fucking panic attack. And that's just what Lucy did. As the years went on, Lucy got more and more violent, regularly trashing the place to get out the frustration of not being able to comprehend what was so fundamentally unnatural about her existence. Finally, the couple had had enough and decided to take Lucy to a primate rehabilitation center in the Gambia, with the hopes that she could be forced to acclimate to primate life. She could barely cope with it at first, getting real depressed and hardly associating with the other apes. Which you'd be depressed too if you had to give up a life of American luxury complete with booze and vacuum fornicating to go live with chimps in the wild. But with the help of a graduate student named Janice, Lucy eventually came to accept her fate, and although she'd never mate with another of her kind, she ended up getting along with her troop well enough. About a year after leaving the rehab center, Janice came back to visit, and Lucy gave her a warm embrace before waddling back to the rest of the chimps. Aww. Then Lucy got poached like a fucking egg, which kinda puts a damper on the whole happy ending, but you know. Whatever. So if there's one lesson to be gained from all this, it's that the best way to learn something is to be immersed in it and to make it part of you. While treats are good for making dogs do backflips, true comprehension comes from integrating new things into your daily life. Hey adults. So most of us are aware of at least one animal companion to the Commander-in-Chief. All but 3 presidents have owned some kind of pet during their term, and there's good reason for that. Not only does a lovable mutt serve to humanize an otherwise larger-than-life figure, but their cute antics can also be a great distraction when needed. Huh? Drone strikes. Never heard of her. Hey, we're doing a photo op with this dog that shares a name with my vice president's son, cause you know, that's not weird at all. But as it turns out, dogs and cats are just the tip of the iceberg. There have been a lot of quadrupedal occupants of the White House, even without Miss Lewinsky. So today we'll be going through just a few of the more interesting ones. Going back to the beginning, Washington had critters galore, including 4 black and tan slur hounds that he named Drunkard, Taster, Tippler, and Tipsy. They sound like if Santa's reindeer were all alcoholics, which would be a shame because Rudolph's red nose would no longer be of note. John Adams had 3 dogs that presumably spanned the alignment chart, being named Juno, Mark, and Satan respectively. Not a joke. Jefferson kept around 40 sheep during his presidency, one of which was a 4-horned Shetland ram. Though nameless, said ram soon became famous for killing a young boy on White House grounds. Rather than immediately destroying the animal as we'd expect today, Jefferson just had it moved back to Monticello. It was eventually put down, but only after it single-handedly killed several other rams at the estate, which just goes to show how Jefferson operated. Random child, not the best optics, but that can be forgiven. But my own property, that's a bridge too far, Rambo. John Quincy Adams' wife Louisa practiced sericulture, which is a fun word for silkworm keeping. As a side note, sericulture's been going on since at least 3630 BC, which is kinda nutty, cause that means we domesticated worms to turn their goo into clothes before we figured out how to ride a horse. Jackson had an African gray parrot named Poll, short for Polly, that would apparently curse like a sailor, probably thanks to the teachings of Old Hickory himself. Having outlived its owner, Poll ended up being removed from Jackson's funeral service after unleashing so much profanity that guests found it genuinely upsetting. He also kept roosters for cockfighting, which was acceptable at the time and still far from the worst thing he's done morally. During Van Buren's term, the Sultan of Oman sent a variety of gifts to the president.
among them being a pair of tiger cubs. He was like, "This is badass," and desperately wanted to keep them in the White House. But the dickheads in Congress asserted that, due to a specific constitutional provision, gifts to the presidential office weren't for the man himself, but for the people. Van Buren said, "Fuck the people, them's my tigers," and got into a legal battle with the legislator over the issue, which he eventually lost. The tigers were subsequently sent to a zoo, and over 20 years later, Van Buren died of pneumonia, completely unrelated to this incident. Although Andrew Johnson had no de jour pets, he did befriend a family of mice he found in his bedroom, feeding them flour and grain and referring to them as the little fellows. It's an oddly wholesome thing to hear from someone who essentially set the trajectory for the next 100 years of black disenfranchisement. Mr. Johnson, we still have a country to rebuild. Get out of my room, I'm getting rat-pilled. Taft had 2 cows during his term. The first of them was named Mooly Wooly, and she died a year and a half in after, quote, eating too many oats. Mooly was promptly replaced by the far more dignified Pauline Wayne. She was a real dime of a heifer, which led Taft to show her off at the International Dairymen's Expo in Milwaukee. In order to get her there, she was transported in a private car attached to a train headed for the stockyards in Chicago. But a switch crew mixed up which car was hers, leading to 2 days of frantic telegraphs asking where the president's cow had gone. She only narrowly avoided the slaughterhouse when a couple of attendants at the stockyard recognized Pauline for what she was, and all was well. This next one requires a little background info. So the traditional Thanksgiving dinner was and remains a significant yearly ceremony for the first family. For half a century, from 1873 to 1913, the duty of providing the presidential turkey belonged to one Horace Vose, a private turkey farmer based in Rhode Island. After his death, though, things turned into a free-for-all, with numerous farmers sending unsolicited turkeys, both alive and dead, in an attempt to secure a position as the next annual caterer for the White House. Nobody was decided on for a decade, and upon assuming office in 1923, Calvin Coolidge found the volume of birds showing up at his doorstep alarming, and put an end to the tradition that year, instead opting to buy his own turkey. But in 1925, after much outside pressure, he caved, and was immediately flooded with not only turkey, but a variety of increasingly exotic animals to eat. Among them was a live raccoon he received the following year. Coolidge was, at the time, blissfully unaware of the intricate dance performed on the palate between forward yet ephemeral gaminess and heady seductive musk when one submits himself to the experience of a toothsome raccoon fillet, and as such he decided to keep it as a pet instead. Dubbed Rebecca, the creature soon came to be a core member of the Coolidge family. She ate as well as any of them, being fed things like shrimp and persimmons, and she was particularly fond of eggs. Given free reign over the house, Rebecca's hobbies reportedly included unscrewing light bulbs, uprooting houseplants, and playing with wet bars of soap in the bathtub. She was so beloved that she even had her own treehouse built for her in the White House yard. When the Coolidges made way for the Hoovers, Rebecca was forced to vacate her post, but the new first family soon found that they had a squatter on their hands. The new tenant of Rebecca's treehouse was a wild opossum who, rather than being evicted, was adopted by the Hoovers in a similar fashion to Rebecca, albeit from a farther distance, mostly just saying, yeah, that's ours now. He was given the name Billy Possum, which is a reference to our old friend Taft. See, as the man following Teddy Roosevelt in the White House, Taft had some big shoes to fill. So during his term, some enterprising young dumbasses approached Taft with what they claimed would be the sequel to the teddy bear. They called it Billy Possum, which is itself a reference to the president's fondness of possum and taters, a dish he famously requested at a banquet in Atlanta as an act of goodwill towards the South and its culture. Taft found the idea amusing enough that he gave the green light, and many thousands of Billy Possums were produced. Given their total obscurity today, it's clear these toys were a massive flop, and there's a few reasons for that. For one, trying to force fads at all is like trying to push water uphill, but also, the story of Roosevelt refusing to shoot a tied-up bear has a bit more symbolic poetry to it than, it's a possum cause he like possum, he a fat boy, eat him up good. Couple that with the constant character assassination that the opossum as an animal has received from ignorant urbanites, and it becomes obvious that this thing was doomed from the start. But anyway, that's where the Hoover opossum got his name, and his exploits were pretty limited outside of temporarily filling in as a mascot of a local high school. In 1961, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev gifted a dog to the Kennedys, named Pushinka, or Fluffy. And while it is normally rude to look a gift dog in the mouth, an exception can be made when the single biggest threat to the free world insists that said dog should live with the president. Pushinka was x-rayed, put through metal detectors, and given ultrasounds out of fear that someone implanted her with a listening device. Fortunately, though there may be bugs in some of you mugs, there ain't no bugs in she, and Pushinka remained a Kennedy for the rest of her days. While truthfully, the gift was likely given as a simple act of good faith designed to reduce Cold War tensions, Pushinka was also the daughter of Strelka, who, during Sputnik 5, became the first mammal to make it back from space alive. So I'd like to think of it as more of a passive-aggressive space race flex. Like, yeah, our astronanimals are so alive, they're making babies even. Hope looking at this one constantly reminds you of where you stand.
Hey kids. I just woke up from a nap I took in January of 2020, and boy are my arms tired. Let's see what I missed. Queen's dead, war in Ukraine, the Taliban's back. What is... Holy shit! They made a movie called Scoob! Unprecedented global pandemic, Space Jam 2, some popular guy named Brandon. Yep, that just about covers it. Anyway, we all know about the scientific names of animals, but did you ever wonder what they actually mean? To find out, we must look to taxonomists. They're the guys responsible for the systems of nomenclature we use to classify organisms, and boy are they convoluted. First you got the big 8, domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. I've seen plenty of mnemonic devices for this, but since the D just showed up in the 90s and is still disputed by some scientists, he's usually not included. So allow me to suggest a few. Dizzy kids puke cereal on fairground staff. Dumb kittens pushing cups over feeds growing spite. Donkey Kong's fucking serendipitously. The way this whole thing works differs slightly depending on which kingdom you pick, so today we'll be sticking to the animal one cause that one's the coolest and I'm in it. So what constitutes each taxon is pretty arbitrary, they basically just serve to act as another set of branches in the tree that taxonomists build. The one exception is species, which is generally defined as any group of animals that can have babies with each other that aren't sterile freaks. Mule, liger, zedonk, skunk ape, they can live fulfilling lives, but they're all shooting blanks so they don't count. On the other hand, in our innumerable trespasses against God, we can make things like chidandanes, which actually work, so dogs are dogs are dogs. Besides species though, it's the Wild West in here. Plenty of times, 8 tiers isn't even enough for scientists, so they just stick new sublevels in between. Legions, cohorts, tribes, series, divisions, and if you want to keep going, you can throw all kinds of prefixes on any of these for even more layers. There's even subspecies, which the more pedantic of you may think to yourselves that creating names for subspecies at all kind of undermines the single somewhat agreed upon definition in the whole tree. To that, my friends, taxonomists say, But while that's pretty complex, the actual names themselves are pretty easy to wrap your head around. Though taxonomists may hide behind their fancy Greek and Latin, the Vulgate is no substitute for wit. Now, I've scraped through the scientific names of a load of species, and most of them can be split into a few categories. The simplest ones are the animals that already have names in Greek or Latin. It's a lion, I'm calling it Leo. Done. Tiger, it's a tigris. Cat, it's a catus. Easy. Multi-word names can be translated the same way. For the golden eagle, we got Aquila chrysaetos. Gold eagle eagle. They decided to be a show-off and do eagle in Greek and Latin. Essentially the same though. But if a species is too specific or exotic for a one-to-one translation, that's when you gotta get a little creative. A lot of the time, inspiration comes from just giving the creature the old once-over and pointing out some cool-looking body part. Generally, the more distinct of an identifying feature it is, the more likely it'll get in the name. For example, Homeboy took one look at this thing and said, "Yup. Red triangle slug. I'm going on break." We call this thing a fucking unicorn, almost like that means one horn or something. Also, some guy deadass looked at an octopus and said, well, all they got is heads and feet. I'ma call them headfoot. And now biologists everywhere say cephalopod unironically. Matter of fact, if it's got feet, chances are that's part of its name somewhere. You got 4 feet, 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet, 2 feet, equal feet, both feet, double feet, stomach feet, lip feet, sucker feet, wing feet, big feet, slow feet, or feet, both feet, joint feet, no feet, 10,000 feet, cow's feet, spade feet, cat feet, small feet. If it doesn't look that interesting, another thing to point out is where you found it. This could be a territory like American bear or Siamese crocodile, or just a habitat like woods macaque or toilet rat. But that's boring. We need to look at the men behind the magic and what drives and motivates them. Now, if there's one thing that the scientific community loves, it's clout. And there's no better way to go down in history than plastering your own name on some shit you found. But not all fields have the same volume of things to scribble the old John Hancock over. On the one end, you got physicists just making up their own slightly different form of ionizing radiation measurement, and even then only the top dogs got away with it. Now zoology, any little goober flouncing through the underbrush can say, this one has 13 spots, but the one in the book's only got 11. I will call him Splinkus's ladybird. Alternatively, plenty of biologists have given shoutouts to their contemporaries, both other biologists and those across the academic gamut, from geologists to physicists to explorers and more. Naturally, Darwin's got a shitload, but even the background characters get immortalized one way or another. Who are Thompson, Grant, Summering, Erlanger, Speke, and Cuvier? I don't know, but they've all got gazelles, so they must be pretty cool. Of course, other times the name checks go to people who had fuck all to do with anything except for one taxonomist being a fan of theirs. Plenty of popular celebrities have species named after them, but since all the big cute stuff was found and branded a while ago, most of these idols are commemorated through repulsive little invertebrates. You got Scaptia, Beyonce. The only similarity I can gather here is queen bee, looks like a bee, both not a real bee. There's Anomphis, Theophilus Jagarius, an old stone named after an old stone. In 2007, one Jason Bond, a professor of biology at UC Davis, dubbed this little dude Myrmecia Neil Youngie to honor his favorite musician, which caused my man Stephen Colbert to go on TV and profess his utter indignation at not having a spider named after himself. So naturally, the next year, Bond actually went on the Colbert Report to announce the naming of apostachus Stephen Colbert. So, if that gives any of you epic biologists out there any ideas, I wouldn't be opposed. Please, I would do anything. For the love of God, I'll even take a lichen. The world of politics is by no means immune to this phenomenon. Obama alone has fucking 9, as do a load of other presidents. Trump's got a moth with funny hair, Bush has a fungus beetle, Reagan's a wasp, Carter's got a darter, and so forth. Even Austria's most famous painter got the honor through this blind cave beetle. Mind you, it was 1933, so you can only blame the guy a tiny bit. Hitler actually wrote him a letter saying, "Oh, thank you, my little entomolomensch," and then went on to do, Hitler things. Fun fact, not only was this beetle stuck with just about the worst name you could have, it's also now facing extinction solely because of its value to Nazi memorabilia collectors. Guess old habits die hard. Fictional characters have their fair share of species under their belt. On the topic of evil beetles, this one's named after Darth Vader because he kinda looks like his helmet, I guess. This was actually named by the same guy who did the Bush one and belongs to the same genus. There's also this mite, genus Darth Vaderum, which is a lot more accurate and frightening. In 2012, a single bone from above the eye socket of a hitherto unidentified theropod dinosaur was being studied. And suddenly, under the light of the full moon, the guy working with the specimen had his neck covered with hair and his lips clench into a pog and his endocrine system filled with soy, and he said, "It's just like the eye of Sauron." And then he started chewing on Funko Pops and sweating cream of meme and snorting G Fuel and shitting D20s everywhere until the prostate stimulation made him. The dino's genus is now Sauroniops, from Eye of Sauron. This spider was named after Godric Gryffindor because it looks like the Sorting Hat. SpongeBob has not a sponge, but a fungus. The legendary birds from Pokemon each have their own, you guessed it, beetle, and the list goes on. Scientists are nerds. Who knew? Anyway, while this all seems kind of chaotic, there is some method to the madness. One rule is the principle of priority. This states that once somebody publishes their chosen name for a species for the first time, that's the name, and other taxonomists typically can't change it. This has led to plenty of misnomers coined by whoever got their foot in the door first, particularly in the case of the guys doing this stuff before we had the luxury of genetic analysis. Here's one. Red panda? Nah. Shining cat, coined in 1825. To be fair, they're actually about as close to cats as they are to actual pandas, so whatever. Here's 2. Capsicum chinense. Eaten there? Sure. Native? Only off by around half a globe, where literally all hot peppers came from. This principle holds true even if someone thinks they found a new species, only to later discover that it was already named. For example, in 1824, one John Edward Gray documented the plain zebra, calling it Equus burchellii, or Burchell's horse, named after a renowned naturalist of the day. Little did he know, back in 1785, some other douche classified this character as the quagga. The last quagga died in a Dutch prison in 1883. So, why do we care? Well, in the 2000s, scientists decided to scrape some gunk off a dry quagga pelt and study its DNA. And from that they realized, wait a minute, apparently this guy and zebras could have, made a little plaid in the hay together. So technically they're one species. And today they're both called quagga. Sounds kinda asinine, but then again so does asinus, and that worked out fine. Just to maintain the distinction, the extinct subspecies was renamed quagga quagga, so you know it's the real quagga. This double naming convention has been done with a lot of subspecies, in fact. Wild horse, spotted panther, or my favorite, gorilla. Just like, yeah, it's the gorillest gorilla that ever gorilled. Fuck you want from me. A closely related rule also states that the names of all taxa have to be unique. So if 2 people coincidentally name any taxon the same thing, the older one gets to stay and the new one gets the boot. Like if you saw a genus called echidna, you'd think it was, an echidna, right? Well, no, that'd make too much sense. For a while it was true, from 1797 to 1811. Then it was pointed out that someone else already called a genus of moray eels echidna back in 1788. So the real echidna had to be changed to Tachyglossus, or quick tongue. Then a decade later, a dude did the same thing for a genus of vipers. Another 22 years passed, people discovered the same thing, and they were renamed to Bitis, cause they bit us. That one at least made a bit of sense, given that the original echidna from Greek mythology was half lady, half snake, but who cares at this point. Anyway, I've just barely scraped the surface of all the goofy names out there, so feel free to post more down below.
Let me talk to you about dog breeding. Nowadays, dogs are mostly around just to be a cute companion, right? So breeding has gone from functionality to cuteness. And that's fine, as long as it stays within the bounds of nature. But that's not enough for today's breeder. So, how do you make a dog cuter? Apparently, by giving it disgusting genetic deformities. And chances are, you, the listener, agree with that. You just don't know you do. Let me show you what I mean. See this? This is a relatively normal dog. Notice the snout, the eyes, the shape of the head, not too far gone from the wolves that today's dogs come from. Now let me take you through some other breeds. First is the Bull Terrier. 100 years ago, still looked pretty normal, right? Now here's today's version. Jesus! Who needs snouts, right? Let's just give it a long, continuous boomerang-shaped head with 2 tiny holes at the end. Seriously, it looks like Toucan Sam is trying to fit inside a dog costume. And look at its eyes! They're permanently pointed up at the sky as if to say, God, why did you let me become this? Please kill me. Do you guys remember Spuds McKenzie, the old Bud Light mascot? Well, I just realized why they chose a Bull Terrier of all dogs. It's because he looked like his mom drank nothing but Bud Light for her entire pregnancy. Next up is the Pug. I'll probably get some hate for this one, but I don't care. They've been bred specifically to look like they've been smashed in the goddamn face with a frying pan. And because of this, because of their fact that their skull is shaped like a fucking tuna can, they can barely breathe their whole lives. Ever been around a pug? Constantly, no matter the temperature or the weather, they sit there going, "Gah, gah, gah, gah." And people think this shit is cute. If my baby came out with a flat nose, hair lip, cylindrical head, and no neck going, "Gah, gah, gah," I'd be like, Jesus fuck, put it back in. It's clearly not done yet. Next is the Dachshund. Now there is no excuse for this one. The head's fine, right? But the body, good God. It's got a torso shaped like a goddamn doorstop with those pointless legs just kind of stapled on. Now it's been a little while since I reminded you what a normal dog looks like, so here. Now let me go into Photoshop real quick and do all the changes necessary to make this dog look like a dachshund. Look at that. That's not okay. Why even have legs at this point? Might as well just keep going until it's just a drumstick from the neck down. And there's no reason. It's just one day someone was like, well, people like dogs and people like ferrets, so why don't we make some chimera abomination halfway in between the two and see what happens. My least favorite breed though, out of all of them, it's just straight up fucked in every way. A testament to humankind's never-ending corruption of the natural world. I'm talking about the Chihuahua. It's like somebody took a normal dog and boiled away every aspect except for anger and neuroticism, leaving this tiny hell creature behind. And this is one of the nicer pictures I could find. Take a look at this. Someone call a priest. And we let these things inhabit our homes. This poor woman's gonna wake up with her fucking nose chewed off and just be like, oh, Mr. Wiggles was a little hungry this morning, wasn't he? Meanwhile, the dog's just sitting there like, bloodlust. The only time they're not being needlessly aggressive towards people, it's when they're off pissing, shitting, and vomiting all over their surroundings. And you would think such a small dog would at least produce manageable waste, but much like the creature itself, the small things it does expel are straight up toxic. It's like some of the Chihuahua's pent-up hatred for the mortal plane manifests itself in every dump it takes. I would rather clean up a full-grown man's shit from my floor than wipe up the septic nightmare that is Chihuahua squirts. The only good thing about owning a Chihuahua is that if it ever gets rabies, it'll be fine because you won't be able to tell the goddamn difference. It'll still be sitting there, business as usual. So that's my little rant about the monstrosities that live right beneath our noses. I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.